I never thought a day would come when I would stand in my own son's living room and feel like a stranger. But that afternoon, when she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're kind of in the way," something inside me sank so quietly that even my heartbeat felt softer. What hurt more wasn't her words. It was the silence that followed. My son stood right beside her. And he didn't say a single thing. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He didn't even look my way. I remember standing there with my hands folded, still holding the small dish I had cooked for them, his favorite stew from childhood. The one I used to make when he came home tired from school, or when he needed comfort, or when he simply wanted to feel loved. That bowl suddenly felt heavy. One had come only to help. Only to support them while they settled into their new home. Only to do what mothers do, quietly, gently, without expectations. But her tone held no warmth. It wasn't rude. It wasn't loud. It was something else, a firm, polished dismissal that told me she had rehearsed it in her mind long before I arrived. I looked at my son again, waiting for even the smallest sign. A glance. A squeeze of my hand. A soft, "Mom, she didn't mean it." But nothing came. The room felt cold even though the afternoon sun was shining through the window. Dust floated in the light, dancing in slow motion, while my world felt like it was becoming smaller. In that moment, a quiet realization settled over me. Love doesn't disappear all at once. Sometimes it fades in silence. In what isn't said. In who doesn't stand up for you. I swallowed my hurt, forced a small smile, and placed the dish on the counter. "Of course," I whispered, "I don't want to cause trouble." But deep inside, a question I never wanted to ask myself started forming, trembling like a leaf in the wind. When did my own child stop seeing me as someone who belonged? And that was the moment everything began to change. My name is Margaret, though most people simply call me Maggie. I am 64 years old, with silver strands running through hair that once used to be as dark as the summer soil back on my parents' farm. I've lived a quiet life, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just small routines, gentle moments, and simple joys. I raised my son, Daniel, on my own. His father left when he was 3, and from that day forward, it was just the two of us against the world. Our home was small, but it was full of laughter, full of warmth, full of moments that still live inside my mind like little glowing lanterns. Daniel was not a perfect child, but he was kind. So kind. He would bring home little drawings from school, always with a stick figure version of me holding his hand. He would bring dandelions from the field behind our house, placing them on the kitchen table like they were roses. "Mom, these are for you," he'd say. Back then, I never imagined a day would come when he would stand quietly behind someone else, unable, or unwilling, to defend me. As Daniel grew older, life naturally changed. He went to college. He made friends. He became busy, then busier. But still, he came home on weekends. Still hugged me every time he walked through the door. Still called me Mama, even as a grown man. Then he met her, Rachel. I still remember the first time he described her. "Mom, she's amazing. She's smart, organized, really, together. You'll love her." I wanted to love her. Truly. When he brought her home for the first time, she was polite. Pleasant, but distant, like someone wearing a coat even when the room was warm. She complimented the house, smiled at the right times, said thank you each time I served her something. But there was a small tension I felt beneath her politeness, the same way you can sense a storm long before the clouds appear. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just being protective, that no one would ever love my son the way I did, so perhaps I was guarding my heart too tightly. After they married, I didn't want to be the mother who interfered or overstayed. So I visited gently, spaced out, always calling before I came. Every time I visited, I brought something small, a homemade soup, fresh bread, a soft blanket I had knitted. I didn't bring these things to impress her. I brought them because that's how mothers speak when words aren't enough. But slowly, little signs began to show. She would sigh when I walked into the kitchen. She would rearrange things right after I touched them. She would say, "Oh, I already cleaned that," even if she hadn't. None of it was cruel. Just cold. Daniel never noticed. Or maybe he pretended not to. When he told me they were expecting their first baby, I cried with joy. Not loud, happy tears, quiet ones, like warm drops falling into soft soil. A grandchild. A new beginning, but even then, Rachel seemed uneasy around me. And I kept telling myself, it will get better. She just needs time. She will warm up eventually. So when the baby was born, and they asked me to stay with them for a little while to help, I felt hopeful again. Hopeful that maybe this new life in the house would soften things. Hopeful that maybe she would see me differently. For the first few days, I woke up early, cooked breakfast, washed dishes, changed diapers, cleaned the bottles, folded laundry. Daniel thanked me again and again. The baby always slept peacefully in my arms. Even Rachel seemed calmer at first. But gradually, very gently, very quietly, the space between us began to harden again. She would watch me with a hint of disapproval. She criticized how I folded the baby clothes. She corrected the way I wiped the counters. She stepped in whenever the baby cried. Even if I had already soothed her, it was as if my presence made her uncomfortable. As if I was a shadow in the corner of her home, one she couldn't quite push away. And then, came the morning when everything changed. The morning she told me, "You're kind of in the way." And my son didn't defend me. That moment did not begin that day. It began long before, in the little signs, the small silences, the spaces between words. But the pain? The pain felt brand new. And that is where the story truly begins. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Sometimes silence feels peaceful. This one felt heavy, like a door slowly closing on me, piece by piece. I noticed the way she watched me. Not with anger, not with kindness, just with that cold, polite distance people use when they're waiting for you to leave. It started with small things, things easy to ignore at first. One morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast for everyone, the way I always did. My son walked in, smiled at me, and kissed my forehead. It warmed me, at least for a moment, but then she came in too. Her eyes went straight to the pan, then to the counter, then to me. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't happy either. She said softly, "I was planning to cook today." I smiled, trying to keep the peace. "Oh sweetheart, I just thought I'd help." "Yes, but it's okay," she replied, lightly touching my arm. Her voice sounded calm, but the message underneath wasn't. I stepped aside. My son didn't say anything. Not then, not later. And that silence was the start of everything. Over the next few weeks, I felt like a guest in a home I used to belong to. I stopped choosing seats at the table. I waited for people to tell me where to sit. I spoke less, smiled more, and tried to be small enough not to disturb anyone. It's strange, isn't it? How a home can feel full of people and yet so lonely. Whenever my son and I were alone, he was still gentle. Still kind, but she always entered the room within minutes, like she could smell closeness and wasn't comfortable with it. And every time she came in, the air changed. I felt like I needed permission just to talk to my own child. The turning point of the tension came in a very small moment. I had folded all their laundry one afternoon, carefully placing each shirt the way my son liked, the same way I used to when he was small. When she saw the neat stacks, she didn't smile. She didn't thank me. She just said, "You don't have to do that. We have our own routine." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was worse, it was dismissive. Like I had overstepped by caring too much. My son was right behind her. He watched the exchange quietly, too quietly. I waited for him to say something. Anything. But he didn't. He simply lowered his eyes and pretended he didn't notice. A deeper crack formed in my heart that day, not because of her words, but because of his silence. One evening, I overheard them talking softly in the living room. She said, "I feel like I can't breathe in my own home." He whispered something I couldn't hear, then she added, "Your mom is always in the way." Those words, they didn't shout, they didn't ring, they simply settled into my chest like a stone. I waited for him to defend me, to say I wasn't a burden. To remind her of everything I gave, everything I was. But the silence that followed told me exactly what he chose. And that was when I began to understand. I wasn't losing my son to anger. I was losing him to influence, to comfort, to the life he built without me at the center. And that hurts more quietly than any direct cruelty ever could. I remember the exact afternoon everything changed. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something quiet did. It was a Sunday, the kind of slow, still Sunday that used to feel comforting. The kind of day when families cook together and sit around the table. But that Sunday, I felt like a guest in my own son's home. I was in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for dinner. I always tried to be useful, even if she didn't want the help. I believed that if I stayed gentle, patient, and respectful, maybe, just maybe, she would soften. But she didn't. She walked in, saw me cutting carrots, and sighed loudly. Loud enough for me to hear it was meant for me. Please don't make a mess, okay? I just cleaned here, she said without looking at me. I froze for a second. A little confused. A mess? I whispered with a small smile, trying to keep things peaceful. I'm using the cutting board. I'll clean everything. But she shook her head, annoyed. It's fine. Just please don't get in the way. That word again. In the way. It clung to me like dust. I stepped back, put down the knife, wiped the counter even though it was already spotless, and quietly went to sit at the dining table, pretending I wasn't hurt. I didn't want to be a problem. A few minutes later, my son came home from running errands. He walked in smiling at his wife, then kissed her forehead. And I watched them together, thinking how beautiful young love can be. Then she pulled him aside, whispered something into his ear, and his smile faded in a way I had never seen before. He looked toward me briefly, not with kindness, but with discomfort, like he had to deal with something unpleasant. I pretended not to notice, but my heart already knew. After a few minutes, he walked over to me. Mom, he said softly, can we talk outside for a minute? His tone was polite, but distant, like a stranger wearing my son's face. I followed him to the porch. The air felt heavy, even though the sky was clear. He didn't sit. He didn't even face me fully. He just stood there, running his hands through his hair, like he was rehearsing something painful. I don't want to say this, he began. My chest tightened. But maybe it's better if you take a little break from staying here. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't want to, but because my throat wouldn't let me. A break? I asked quietly. I didn't know I was causing any trouble. He looked away. You're not, Mom. You're not. It's just, she feels crowded. She feels like the house isn't ours anymore. She feels he stopped. I helped him finish the sentence he couldn't say. She feels like I'm in the way. He winced, like hearing it out loud made him realize how cruel it sounded. Mom, it's not like that, he said quickly. But it was. We both knew it, he just didn't want to admit it. Or maybe, he didn't see anything wrong with the request. That realization hurt more than the words. My son, the boy I raised, the boy who used to cling to my hand, the boy who once said he'd take care of me when I grew old, now spoke to me like I was a piece of luggage someone forgot to put away. Something replaceable, something unnecessary, something in the way. I nodded slowly, even though my eyes burned. How long is the break? I asked. He shrugged. Maybe a few weeks. Maybe until things feel normal again. Normal. I wondered what normal meant without me. I forced a smile, because mothers do that. We pretend we're strong so our children don't feel guilty. I understand, I whispered. But he didn't hear the crack in my voice. Or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it. He hugged me briefly, not tightly, not like my son used to. Then he went back inside. Through the window, I watched him wrap his arm around his wife. She looked relieved to have me gone. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not resentment, just a quiet collapse of something I had held for years, the belief that love alone could hold someone close. I stood outside for a long time, the evening breeze brushing against my face. Not crying, not yet, just absorbing the truth. I raised him with love. But love wasn't enough to keep me from being pushed away. That was the moment, the turning point, when I realized my place in his life had changed. And I was the only one who hadn't seen it coming. When the house finally grew quiet again, I sat in the small guest room they placed me in. The walls felt cold, and the air felt unfamiliar, like it did not want me there. I could still hear her words echoing in my mind, she's in the way. And what hurt even more was the silence that followed from my son. The silence he chose. I thought about walking out that night. Just packing my small bag, leaving a note on the table, and disappearing quietly. But something in me stopped. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe it was the part of me that still believed love was stronger than distance. The next morning, I woke before everyone else. I made coffee the way he used to like it when he was young, a little sugar, not too much. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a moment, I imagined it was years ago. When he would run down the hallway in his tiny socks, calling, "Mom. Is breakfast ready?" It was those memories that kept me steady. When he finally came into the kitchen, his hair messy from sleep, he looked surprised to see me awake. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then pulled out a chair. "Mom," he said softly, I didn't know what to do yesterday." His voice cracked on the last word. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I raised was still there, beneath all the layers adulthood had wrapped around him. Beneath his wife's fears, his own confusion, his desire to keep peace. "I know," I whispered. "Life gets complicated." He lowered his eyes like a child being gently corrected. "She thinks I'm too attached to you, that I won't grow as a husband if I don't learn to set boundaries." I nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" He swallowed. I just didn't want to upset anyone." There it was, the truth. Not cruelty, not rejection, just fear of disappointing the wrong person. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You don't lose anything by standing up for kindness. Not for me, for anyone." His eyes softened then, and I saw regret settling in. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have told her that you're family. I should have said more." But I shook my head. "You're still learning. We all are." For a moment, we just sat there, letting silence speak in a softer language than words. Later that afternoon, his wife came home. She avoided my eyes at first, walking around the kitchen with the heavy guilt of someone who knew she had gone too far. I didn't call her out. I didn't make her explain. I simply said, "Would you like tea?" "I'm making some." She froze. Her eyes lifted, and something broke inside her, not pride, but the defensive shell she had been living in. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." We stood there in the kitchen, two women tied together by one man, afraid of hurting him, afraid of losing him, both unsure how to exist together. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but honest. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said. I was stressed. I felt overwhelmed. And I took it out on you." I nodded gently. "Overwhelmed as that. It makes us forget we're speaking to human hearts." She breathed out shakily. "I don't want him to choose between us." "You don't need to worry," I replied quietly. "A mother's love isn't competition. And a wife's place doesn't need defending. There is room for both." Her shoulders loosened, the tension melting away. For the first time, she smiled, not politely, but with genuine relief. "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that. We sat together at the small dining table with warm tea between us, not friends yet, not strangers anymore, simply two people trying to understand each other. Later that evening, my son wrapped his arm around my shoulder like he used to do as a teenager. "Stay longer, Mom," he said. "This house feels better with you in it." And this time, his wife nodded in agreement. I didn't say yes or no right away. Instead, I smiled, calm, warm, and full of the gentle strength life had taught me. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, relief. It means choosing peace over pride. And in that quiet moment, I realized something powerful. Even when we feel pushed aside, the love we planted still blooms somewhere inside the people we raised. When I look back on everything now, I don't feel anger anymore. Not even sadness in the same way I once did. What I feel is a quiet understanding. A gentle acceptance that people change, and relationships change with them. I used to think love was something that stayed the same forever, like a photograph that never fades. But life taught me that love can shift, soften, and reshape itself over time. It doesn't always disappear, sometimes it simply transforms into something different. I think about my son often. Not with bitterness, but with a kind of soft longing. I remember the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. The teenager who stayed up late asking questions about life. The young man who hugged me before leaving for his first job. Those memories, they are mine. No one can take them from me. And even though he didn't defend me that day, even though he let her words push me aside, I realized something important. He is living a life shaped by choices I cannot control. He is building a home with someone who sees the world differently than I do. And sometimes, in trying to survive their own life, people forget the hands that once carried them. But forgetting does not erase the truth. The truth is, I loved him, I raised him, I gave him everything I could with the heart I had. And that love remains, even in silence. I don't wait by the phone anymore. I don't replay the hurt in my head. Instead, I wake up, open my windows, let in the morning light, and remind myself that life still has room for peace, for small joys, for gentle mornings and quiet evenings. Some days, he texts. Short messages, not quite the son I once knew, but still a connection. Still something, and on those days, I smile. Not because everything is fixed, but because healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it is as simple as breathing without pain. I tell myself this. Even when others fail to stand by you, you can still stand by yourself. And that is enough. Maybe one day, he will see things clearly. Maybe one day, he will understand the weight of silence. And the cost of loyalty misplaced. Maybe he will remember who held him first, but until then, I choose peace. I choose to carry love without expecting it back. I choose to forgive without needing an apology. I choose to move forward without closing the door completely. Because life has a gentle way of bringing people home, when the time is right. And if that day comes for him, I will be here, not waiting, just living, just breathing, just ready to offer a warm smile to the boy I once raised, and the man he is still becoming.